Here we are. All right.
All right, thanks.
We're good to go, Carrie. Thank you.
So we'll call this meeting of December 21st, 2020 to order. This is our work session this evening. We've got all 5 commissioners and our town manager and our town attorney here present. And we've swapped out our regular business meeting and instead we'll be doing a work session. And the end of the year seems like a good time to reflect on what's happened this year and more importantly, what we want to do next year, what the thoughts all of us have, and what our town wants, what the residents want to see in 2021 and beyond. I've heard from Martin and from Jim, and certainly myself have said a few times that we really need to have more time setting priorities. And I know that Jeff and Ed, as our new fellow commissioners, also bring a wealth of ideas and thoughts. And so it just seems like a good time to start planning these kinds of workshops. Usually, of course, they'd be happening in person, open to the public, but in a more informal setting. I know that a lot of towns do this kind of thing, just in their own town hall or go off campus somewhere and do like a retreat for obvious reasons. We're doing it this way instead. But I think, that's another discussion that we could have for the future is when and where we may want to have some more of these. And if we do want to really dig in and spend some time on strategic planning here. And after having some conversations with several of you, and in light of the fact that we don't have a professional facilitator to do this kind of session, I've just come up with kind of a fluid agenda for tonight, sort of a jumping off point. And I think it's important that we're not here too long, maybe not too much past an hour. I know it's the holidays, and then we also do have to adjourn to a closed session after this as well. So just quickly, what I'd come up with in terms of an agenda is the first thing is to talk about what happened in 2020. And I mean, obviously, the challenge of COVID-19 is at the top of that list, though I don't necessarily want to linger there too much because I think probably everybody at this point has COVID fatigue. But then I do want to talk about some successes that we did have in spite of the pandemic. And then secondly, we'll take a look at what are the town initiatives that were already started and need to be finished, that were maybe halted for some reason, and what's new for 2021. And Seth will facilitate any additions or subtractions discussion to that as well. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about how are we going to establish our priorities for 2021. We want to bring our own thoughts to the table, but we also want to outline a process in which we interface with all of the stakeholders, right? So that's, all of our residents, our businesses, our own team here, right? Our committees, our staff, and then also talk about what's the best solution moving forward for facilitating that. Whether we, contract with someone or, or maybe we can find folks in the community that, would be interested in helping us with this. So let's start off with the challenges and successes. And I think you said that I could share my screen somehow.
Yes, you should be able to.
Don't we usually say the Pledge of Allegiance first?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. I know I was a little late.
I'm sorry.
You already do the pledge?
Sure, we sure can. You wanna lead us, Jeff?
I'll be happy to.
Thank
I
you.
pledge allegiance to the
Pledge
flag
allegiance to the flag
of the United States
States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I bypassed that since we had moved into a different kind of session this evening. Okay. So I might need some help, Seth, on how I do this.
Sure. You should be able to go down.
Oh,
to
I
the-
see, I see.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Right, there we are.
Get bigger. Okay. So can everybody see that? All right.
Yes.
All right, great. So I just started off with, like I said, our obviously, you know, the news of the day, our major challenge. And then I thought we could fill in the holes for our successes this past year. Obviously, the number one issue for all of us that we've been feeling in our own families and then in our community is just this overall uncertainty and fear, stress related to public health, and then how that has also affected mental health. And then, secondarily, or perhaps, just as importantly, the fact that businesses have been so affected by this pandemic. And they certainly took a hit in Poolesville like everywhere else. We saw the closure of a couple of businesses. The Watershed Cafe closed. I know Banana Tree Embroidery is no longer going to have a brick and mortar storefront, although they are going to be continuing as an at-home business. I know Oriental Gourmet and Mexican Grill closed their doors for a period of time when this all began. There was a new business that opened, Locals, also has now shut down temporarily. And I believe they were going to be doing that anyway to start construction in the new year. But I believe that they also did shut down a little bit earlier than planned because of the rates were going up. And then, all of our businesses have had, erratic closures and reopenings and have had to make a lot of quick and sometimes, I'm sure costly changes. The restaurants in town have had to change their seating several times now. And then, lots of businesses have been dealing with furloughing and sometimes layoffs, loss of revenue. So that's, the doom and gloom that we've all been seeing, of course. And then I wanted to just start out in terms of success. I think that the reaction to COVID-19 is certainly in the success category. Overall, the communication, I think, between staff and businesses and the public has been good. I know that early on the staff reached out to businesses in terms of helping with the CARES funding as well as other funding sources. There's just been more of a connection, I think, between businesses in general, as well as with the town and obviously the public and businesses really helping out each other. And then that also plays into the resilience. I know Seth has talked a lot about sort of this cross-department staffing that he's been doing just in adapting to the various ways that everyone works together at the town. Businesses showed their resourcefulness by changing their business models. I just loved how so many of them just have been thinking outside of the box and they have to survive, and it's pretty amazing to see the different ways that they've been changing their business models. So I just wanted to kind of start out with throwing those successes out, and thought I would open it up to everyone else to throw out things that you have seen as successes as well. I know another one I would definitely want to start with is the Montgomery County Public Schools starting the high school design concept. That's definitely been a real success for the Fair Access Initiative and for the school.
Yeah, I think you covered most of them, Carrie.
Is there some that you wanted to add, Seth?
Yes, actually would. I mean, we have a new website we put together. The town commission meetings are now virtual in that regard. I think with the new website and new applications and the how-to guides associated with it, we've tried to make that a little bit easier for the residents and applicants. That's always a continuation and process. We've undertaken our street paving project. We've taken ownership of Fisher Avenue, West Willard Road, Hughes Road, and portion of Westerly, which has been a multi-year project for the town.
Yeah, that's been a great one.
Oh, hold on a minute. Let you catch up. We have the crosswalks on Fisher. We've put in, our first flashing lights. It's clearly part of the overall initiative to get in that street. So that's kind of a outgrowth of that success.
And those crosswalks are excellent.
They're really good. The
Yeah, those are
grant,
great.
the grant we received to be able to rebuild the Helmholtz restrooms. It's a core park in the center of town. I think it'll be a good renovation project. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see, we did join the canal towns. We did update the sewer capacity plan. And I'll let you, we had a very successful election during COVID. The process we had to go through really was different than what we're used to. So, classify that how you will, but I mean, it definitely required a little bit different process than the town was used to.
It was quite impressive, actually.
Bobby deserves a lot of credit and Maggie for helping that process. And finally, this is something, I mean, clearly we have the pickleball courts. It's an addition to our system. But, the other thing too is if you want to, we'll see where the farmers market goes. But that was you made that change about 12, 18 months ago in your code, or your policies at least, to provide for it. And you had a farmers market for at least the last half of the year.
Yeah, hopefully that will be even bigger and better next year.
Those are some things I had.
Do we get a server?
We did get a server.
I think that's pretty good.
No, I mean, it allows us to collaborate. And honestly, I'm not sure how the server works, but when I go home, it shows all my files on here, even though I'm disconnected off the network, and I can access those files, from home, and work on things. So, I mean, I'll be able to take a lot of documents home without carrying a flash drive or other things.
I think the server is a huge improvement. I mean, every technology person I talked to was kind of shocked and appalled that we didn't have a server for so many years. So I think that's a good thing.
Is it a little bit like Dropbox where you put files and you can access them basically anywhere?
Exactly. That's exactly correct. And it allows cross collaborations across teams. And I look at it also as a time saving mechanism where if we're all working off one document, one location, we're not trying to say, what's the last document? What's the latest version? Can you email that me?
Right.
Person's in the office, they've run out to lunch, they've taken a call, you have to worry
It's
about
also a lot safer in terms of, disaster recovery and backup.
That's correct. That's there as well. Correct.
So I thought you were mentioning when you asked for accomplishments, COVID related accomplishments. Another accomplishment in addition to what Seth mentioned, you could add to that as the EV chargers.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Did you have one, Ed?
Yeah, sure. I would, if you go back up to the left to your challenges, and
Yes.
then I'll see it's a twofold piece. And this is just my observation when I was on the outside versus when Jeff and I got elected.
Mhm.
But I think one of the challenges of 2020, it was the events. We weren't able to do the traditional events that
Right.
everyone loves. So that would definitely be one of the challenges.
Right.
But I also think that a success, though, was there were some things that we were able to do as a town. You know, the farmers market, it speaks to one. I think the other piece where you had the shred event,
Uh,
The
uh-huh.
big flea.
the big flea. All right.
Yeah.
I think that was a huge success. I think everyone did what they needed to do to mask up and do what was necessary. So I thought that was a plus.
Mhm.
And so I think that another success, was finding creative ways to still get some major things done.
Right.
I want to give a shout out because we're still in 2020. I want to give a shout out to our crew that does the water treatment. Right, that crew does a great
Mhm.
job, and we want to make sure that we publicly acknowledge the hard work that they're doing, especially when we look at the pipes. I believe that's the same crew that when we have a water main break, they get
Mhm.
out and they take care of that.
Mm-hmm.
And how I think that the response to emergency
Mhm.
by our teams, all of our teams. So I think that's definitely. I think also just another success. It's being able to keep town open because is my understanding that people had to rotate in at certain points,
Mhm.
and so despite the challenges, the hardworking members of our staff, they all pitched in and continued to keep us moving as a town.
I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of places, unfortunately had to furlough staff, and we were able to avoid that. So that's a really good point.
Mm.
And we still were able to keep the level of service, which was phenomenal.
And then when we look at just that small town charm, I think that looking at right now the lights, although we didn't have the traditional lighting of the tree and the menorah, that crew went out there and they did a great job with the lighting. I
Mhm.
think that the team that came in and did for Veterans Day, that event that took place in the front, I think that was a nice tribute to our vets on Veterans Day. Right,
That's
that
right.
group that came out and did that.
Or the American Legion.
The American
Yeah.
Legion's Veterans Day event was a success. And I'm wondering if there's any other events. I think is
You know,
important.
go ahead, Ad.
Yeah.
While you're speaking this, it's easy to forget it, but the students' pictures on the commons. You know, I mean,
Graduation pictures.
yeah, I mean, two things, that kind of go together here is one is the holiday lighting event and the graduation event.
Mhm.
In such a tough year, the lights just kind of, without being hokey, I mean, they really do kind of, light things up for the community, because it just been a tough year, right? It gives people an opportunity to get out and look at those lights and appreciate them as they always have. Again, as Ed said, the event's different, but with the high school graduation and watching students come and find their pictures and parents take pictures of the students next to their pictures. I mean, to me, it's a really kind of touching thing in a challenging year, but I think
Right.
it also made it more meaningful, to the community that that was available to them and that occurred.
I think
Yeah.
another thing that was successful was even with some of our nonprofits that are in the community, and with the WAMCO with the Scarecrow contest. And so what you see is, although we couldn't have the big events that we're used to,
Hmm.
the response to not having the traditional events was well met because people stepped up, all different people in the staff, people who are members of the community. Everyone has stepped up to add value to our community. So we don't let the challenges prevent us from still doing something. I think we should give a shout out to the Poolsville Area Chamber of Commerce, because what I've noticed as a member, I also noticed that they were broadcasting their monthly breakfast meetings that are happening on Thursday. That was open to anybody, anyone who had a business, anyone thinking about doing a business. I think the chamber showed leadership in doing those things. So that's another success. The other thing too, I'll give is the committee that worked on the census, and it's my understanding that we did very well with getting people to complete their census work.
I think we did very well. Much.
I think,
But
yeah, I
it's
don't
some of
have
the
the
highest
exact
turnout
number.
rates. Yes.
Yeah, but I know everywhere I look, every different circles I was in, the question was, "Hey, did you get your census?" I give Jerry credit.
That's right.
Jerry was doing his thing, so I thought that was really well done.
We also got some new folks on our committees. We had some outstanding folks apply for our committees this year, and I see that as a huge success. Just seeing how many people are interested in serving the town.
Yep. And speaking of committees, I like to just give a shout out to the Fair Access Committee, since I've been able to do some of those things and just really learning from. I'll give a public shout out, Jim. Thank you for sharing some things and showing me some things that I needed to know. I really appreciate that. Give a shout out to all those volunteers who are really working hard. And I know prior to even running, when I joined the Fair Access, the energy and the commitment of those folks who serve on that committee to take care of the Western region is outstanding. Another piece I think we should give credit to are the people who've come to share their thoughts and going through Zoom, watching on YouTube, and then jumping in to have their moments to share their thoughts. Particularly the young boys who came and had a proposal. I watched them talk to the Parks, Streets, and Recreation Committee, and when the two young men came in to share their proposal on how to improve the skate park, I think that's a true success, because instead of they took something that we all were disgusted with, which is someone vandalizing with paint and things. Right. Say, hey, we got an idea. And to watch those young boys take ownership of where they like to hang out, I think that's really commendable. And hopefully more young people will step up and get involved.
That's right. Okay, well, this doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but I think there's just as many things that had to be halted or we began and just haven't brought to fruition yet. I think I'll let Seth kind of start chatting with us about that a little bit.
Sure. Let me see where that list is at. So if we're looking at items that weren't necessarily completed, don't know if you're going to open up a new tab or if you just want me to go right ahead. So here's some of the things. A couple of them are kind of happening as we go, but one of the things that haven't been fully completed yet is the historic gateway signage. The Forest Bank, which we've been probably talking about in the past couple months, getting that advanced a little quicker, some less in my court. A benefit assessment fee, while I brought it up to you more recently, Jay and I have been discussing this since early September, and we were able to finally get it. I was able to finally get it on the agenda. The benefit assessment fee relates to the capacity projects, sewer capacity. begin updating the town codes. We had talked about starting with streamlining the boards and commissions. That hasn't been completed. The bike racks, which the Parks and Rec is going back and looking at alternatives that because the price came in a little high. We talked about policies such as use of the town marquee and what groups would use those. So we've talked about usage of town facilities by different groups, and that's something we haven't completed as well. It's just kind of my list. That's my list of the not completeds or just sort of need to be started yet. I don't know if anybody else has anything that comes to them off the top of their head.
I would say too that the website is probably something that, like, as much as we've counted as a success, it still probably has some stuff to be completed.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's like some dead links on there and some things that kind of take you in a circle. So, and I'm sure those will be fixed soon. But that I would say is something that we haven't followed through totally on yet. I understand it's a work in progress. I mean, I'm not
No, I hear you.
criticizing.
And I just had a call with somebody about that today, take care of some of the issue.
So Seth, I have a question for you. The list of things that weren't completed, historic gateway, no, that list that you just gave. What do we do with those things? Do we decide to proceed with them to make sure that, because I assume if they got started that they had some value to the town and to the residents. So I'm just wondering, sure. Do we just say, yes, we need to complete that, or somehow magically it happens?
Well, the way to handle this is a couple of these have been more started in discussion than action items and put down on paper and started to be worked on. And some of them are fairly recent, bigger items we have to deal with. So some of these items may lead into initiatives for 2021 and what we need to complete. So if we didn't complete them in 2020, either because we picked them up late in the year or other priorities came along, I foresee these being elements we need to work on moving in 2021.
Okay. Is that something it seems, I don't know, not so complicated as something like bike racks? Something that perhaps is more complicated might be policies and so on. So, I mean, I would assume that the parks and the recreation parks and the streets committee is going to proceed with finding a new provider for the bike racks, that kind of thing. So I think that will take, I believe that will take care of itself. Of these other areas like, the policies, and that does seem like it requires considerable more thought and action on our part.
That's correct. There's a couple things on here that are modest lifts. One's a real light lift, and then the other ones do have a little bit more policy decision-making process involved in them.
Okay.
And I think there's also other initiatives that we've, started to talk about that hopefully we will bring to fruition next year. We've discussed starting some new committees. We've talked about a youth council. We've thrown out the idea of some kind of a diversity and inclusion committee. So, these are things that we've just started talking about, but, next year could be, starting out, really putting these things together.
So what I like to see us do, and Seth, I'll look towards you first, because as we go through and we hear a lot of the different initiatives and there's different scale of it, there's you hear an idea, right? And you hear some initiatives. It could be something as simple as a bike rack or something that's more complex as a policy issue. Perhaps what we could do is get a list of those initiatives and really look at what's the scalability of those initiatives. But the couple of questions I want us to look at is, what are they? Who's responsible for bringing it into fruition? And what's the time frame? So if we can have just a real structured process to move from just the conceptualization
Mhm.
phase to the implementation, and then the stuff in between are the questions that have to be answered. So we have a concept, whatever that concept might be, and I call that the ideas. And then as we go moving from ideating great ideas, then we really want to look at, well, here's this idea. Who would be responsible? Is that a board issue? Is that a town issue? Is that a committee or a committee issue? And then we look at what's the policy that impacts the idea. Is there any policies governing the implementation of the idea? And then we look at what is that time frame, so that we can. It's like project management, just
Sure.
really moving, come up with the list of those things. Then what needs to happen, right? So that it just doesn't camp out in the land of good ideas. That we really move to, okay, is going to go or it gets off the table. I'm sorry if I jumped the gun, but
Well, actually, this may be a
Yeah.
nice transition. We've got some not completed, but if we focus on upcoming initiatives, I created a list I can share with you on the screen. But I think, again, to your point about things living in the land of good ideas and not getting accomplished, some of these have a greater priority rate than others. Of course, some of that's always subjective.
Mhm.
And of course, some of these are time pressing depending on how we go as a town in terms of our direction. But we will have to prioritize these, and I think, and any other ideas that you all have, because this is just my list. I'm sure you have others. And the point is, we're gonna have to pick priority because we can't achieve all the things on here. Let me share a screen. What Word doc is this?
While you're sharing your screen, I have a question for Jay, or maybe it's a question for Ed and Jay. Back in early November, I think maybe it was late October. Anyway, Ed and I had several conversations about a possibility of having, well, I think what we referred to as informal conversations with residents. And I think at that time we didn't, I'll speak for myself. I didn't know that we needed to have a limit on the number of commissioners that get together and have discussions so that we don't violate the Open Meetings Act by, having discussions or making decisions outside of a public forum. So we realize that now. But is it something that we could do? And maybe it's more of a question for Jay. If two commissioners get together, like Ed and I, because we had talked about this before, if two commissioners get together and, let's say the COVID stuff is past us or some other mechanism, and we get together at the picnic bench in Wayland Commons, and just some citizens, some residents come over and we start chatting, and we listen to their ideas, listen to their concerns, listen to their whatever it is that's on their mind, and just take notes and bring it back to a commissioner meeting. Is that kind of an agreeable thing to do?
That's fine. You look at it this way. If you have a quorum, which is 3 members, you have to give notice that you're going to be together, because you're going to be meeting. It is called a meeting then, right? And you're going to be talking about public business. Even if you're on your honor not to vote and not to discuss,
Right.
That's it. So if you're going to have these like informal, just meet me in the park session, you'll probably give notice of it anyway.
Yes.
So then you wouldn't be disenfranchising anybody else who says, hey, I'd like to come. But we would want to have like a ground rules, like a little policy thing where we tell the public, this is just kind of listening. We're not going to be discussing as a group. We're certainly not going to try to reach consensus on that. But it can be structured to do what you want. Not a problem.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because Ed and I had talked about this, like I say, early before either of us were elected. And I still think it's a good idea, because oftentimes, we get on this meeting and we think we know what everybody wants, and we're going down the completely wrong track because we really don't know what other folks want. So in my opinion, the best thing, as I worked for General Electric and a number of other companies for quite a long time. And, they always had this, they call it the voice of the customer. And so in this case, it'd be the voice of the residents and what's on their mind. Not so much what's important, it's on what's Jeff's mind and what's on the resident's mind. So, okay, I think that we can work that out. I don't think it has to be overly complicated. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jay.
So what I've added on here is a list of initiatives that I came up with that I know sort of been hanging out there, discussions we've had. Uh, the benefit assessment fee, we've talked about that related to sewer capacity. The forest bank program, there's going to be certain developments that could take advantage of that. Um, then there is the Economic Development Committee, which has been talked about a little bit before. They've had that codified in the past in the code. The master plan, clearly COVID has had an impact on that. I've shared with you all before kind of the concept of, depending on how we will move forward, finance director, benefits coordinator.
Oh, Seth, I have a quick question. Has an update, because the master plan was in 2010 or 2011 or so, and has an update on the master plan already begun?
No. There's two ways to look at this. One is we have gone back and amended it and added in, I believe, the village overlay district. So one could add that, sometime in 2014-ish, we've added that. So the clock starts maybe more at 2015 than 2011. But nonetheless, we have not started this process. We have allocated dollars in the budget to do this through a consultant-based process. But COVID really put a hold on this because these plans are so public-centric driven documents and public input, and it's really helpful to be in a public format. We've held off to date on that.
Is there a way that we can move forward with this in 2021? Yeah. Maybe utilizing, if we're probably still going to be in this crazy world we're living in for a while in 2021. So, is it still possible to move forward and have some kind of online sessions as if we, like the ones we would have done in person with the public?
I might want to add, kind of add on to Carrie's statement and say that, some of the information in the all of the information in the master plan is very useful. The part that I found really exceptionally insightful is the survey. And I'm thinking a survey is probably, a very good tool to put online, and folks can go on there and answer questions and so on. And I think that element of the master plan fits very well with an online tool. Now, I suspect it was done on an online mechanism before. Maybe, I don't know if was it mailed out or online back in 2010.
I think it was an online through SurveyMonkey, from what I gathered.
Yeah,
that's what it looked like when I read through it.
What's that, Ed?
When I had read through just a couple of things, so I looked at that master plan, but I had also looked at the company that was contracted out when they were looking at the economic development piece. Mm-hmm. And it looked like there was a survey that was done in that document. But I think, not to dig too deep into the weeds right at this moment, but if we go, so I'll go back to what I said earlier. If we look at those initiatives, and I think that we would have to really tease those out and say, all right, so these are some initiatives. What's missing from this list? And I think based on what we have on our sketched agenda, that probably be the third part for tonight's discussion. But when we look at these pieces, we might say, okay, since we're talking about the master plan, who's going to be that group? Identifying who's that team, what's that process, what's that policy, and then we have a starting point. Because I think it's really important to have some structure around each item that we want to go through, and to make sure that we are in alignment with any policies or laws that need to be followed. I also think, I'll give you just an example. When we look at the master plan, I think it would be wise to at least get feedback from those who are available, those who contributed to writing the master plan, being able just to get their input and their feedback, their insight from, because I think they did a great job to do it, because before they wrote a master plan, there wasn't that master plan. And so there's things that have changed, but I always want to pay respect to those who came before us. And what can we learn, and what would they do if they were doing it differently? There might be questions that we would want to come up with, so that when we go to make the next master plan or to vote on the next master plan, that we've had a chance to hear the voices of those who created it, the voices of those who are impacted by it, so that we could come up with the best possible outcome. And I think that might be some of our responsibility, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, one of the nuances, let me throw in there for you all, is that the master plan and its responsibility and its drafting is in the planning commission.
That's what I thought.
So you are going to have to, from one standpoint, realize that there's going to be resources, staff time, consultants, whatever, needed to be allocated to a body that usually just meets once a month and discusses things. They need to take on a bigger role, so they need to be beefed up. And then the second thing is you're going to have to help them create the charrettes and the background and the goals while making it their plan, because it eventually comes back to you to bless or not bless. So you want to make sure you have that impartiality ability to do that, but it can be done. But just remember that it's the planning commission's got to be put almost in the driver's seat, and you got to bring them into this process.
Jay,
and to the comments about how we need to have a survey or whatever, I think that Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Maryland law dictates that you have to get citizen input.
Yeah, there's different levels of how you do it. Obviously, if you work backwards from this, there's a public hearing at both board levels on the final plan. But if you work back through it, most places do like public charrettes in the beginning. What do you see your plan? What do you do that? Just general pie in the sky things. And then when they get portions done that are relevant, then they kind of get the public to say, we need some help on land use, like zoning, on potential types of things like that. So they just make it small micro issues for the ones that are really technical.
how are other municipalities dealing with this in the age of COVID?
Well, I do know one community just north of us, and actually not far from Jay, is in the process. I think they started pre-COVID and are working through this process now in COVID, and are doing these charrettes through more of an online process, Zoom type meetings and those sort of things. So it is happening. The person I'm familiar with who's in the industry, I could touch base with that person and get some feedback. It's not that we can't, start the process as has been indicated here, because the first step before we do anything is sort of send out a request for proposals and go through hiring of a consultant. So, I mean, even if we started fairly soon, we would be sometime, probably in, April-ish on this. And so I know that people have concerns about, consultant, but, it's how you manage and what you get on these things, because, I've been through, 3 master plan updates in different communities, and, you've got it's really about ensuring that they have your vision in mind for your community. And that's why these are such big public input processes. And the Planning Commission is responsible for drafting these, as Jay said. The Planning Commission itself can be the subcommittee that provides the guidance, directly to that consultant as the local body. And of course, you're still getting public input, but all that public input has to be massaged into some format. And the Planning Commission can be that. I've seen where the Planning Commission says, we all sort of signed up to be here once a month and on a Wednesday and take care of regular business. Maybe we can do a citizens advisory committee of, anywhere between 6 to 9 people that can take some of this off with your blessing. So you kind of get a committee that's representative of different groups as well, that become a citizen advisory committee. And their biggest role often is getting their friends and family and neighbors out to meetings and reaching out to the different groups, and then helping put together things. And does land use and transportation go together, or should we pull out transportation and land use as separate topics? How do we do, water and sewer? Is that part of infrastructure with transportation? Take transportation away from land use and put transportation in an infrastructure chapter, right? How do you want to structure that? And I can tell you, I went through Charlestown's with a consultant. It was very driven by the public in the community, and I read every single page and ever edited every single page, as they came. I didn't just accept it from them. So it's an intensive process, but you're laying out the vision of your community for the next 10 to 20 years. And it's an important project for this. But I mean, we've kind of gone pretty deep on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I think we put pretty deep. I saw Jim, I saw you trying to jump in there, Jim, a couple of times. Jim,
No, I'm just
done
listening and absorbing. So I appreciate the chance to be, just listen and absorb. That's all I'm doing.
Okay.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I can't talk about it right here in this little, in the Zoom. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and just up front, we put together 2 very successful master plans, and I'm going to say up front, I'm unwilling, unless somebody proves it to me otherwise, that we're going to be handing it over to a consultant. And I know you're not saying that, Seth, up front, but I've watched the good work of the Planning Commission, tasked by the commissioners to come up with solid master plans. And I'd like to, I want to make sure that this ends up being something that's truly town of Poolesville driven, all residents driven, with a lot of transparency. And, you guys are going to have to convince me. I mean, you don't have to convince me. You can vote me down 4-1, but I'm not so sure I'm in favor of hiring a consultant to do something that the town has done successfully over the years. So, Seth, maybe you could start off. Maybe you could send us your one of the master plans that the consultant has helped produce, so we can get an idea what that looks like.
Sure. Hey, Jim, what I was thinking too, before we go too far deep down this road, what I was thinking too is just really saying, okay, what exactly is that process? So that's why I'll go back to what I said before, is what are the lessons learned from those who developed it, the last 2 master plans. And then if we look at, so I'll go back to even earlier, what's the concept? What's the idea? What's the process? Who are the people that need to do that? What are the policies that govern that? And I think, we look at those, and if that process, it starts in the planning committee, and see what comes from there before we get into too deep of a conversation without the input of the planning committee, then the conversation might be turned into something that's premature.
So I'll just speak up and say that I differ with Jim on this. I think the notion of having a consultant come in and help us write the master plan, like working closely with the planning committee, makes a lot of sense. I think that, if we do it ourselves, there's too many blind spots we could leave in the master plan. So I'll be concise. I think that having a consultant, like for something as important as a master plan that's going to last for so many years, is something that we would benefit from personally.
Well, wait, as I said, you only need 3 other votes, dude, but I'd have to wait to see what the consultant looks like. I'd have to see what the plan, I want to put my trust in the planning commission. They are hard workers. They represent the town. I like the group that we have. I think they got the brain power to do it. And could a consultant weigh in? Sure. And could they help? Yeah, if we need it. But this is a Poolesville driven document, and one that's
I agree with you. I agree that it's a Poolesville driven document. It has to be a Poolesville driven document, but I think a consultant can still work with us and make it a Poolesville driven document. But anyway, we're premature on that. I agree. We should see the documentation and see what we're looking at.
Well, then what I'll do is I'll just move on through this a little bit. Previously at the last meeting, we've discussed the code compliance program, the planning and subdivision code updates, in addition to the town code updates we've focused on as well. Planning and forecasting for long-term infrastructure. I'm currently doing this with my team. This is really principally Matt's area in the wastewater treatment plant, and Andrew's area, wells, pump stations, and the piping, what is aging out and what does that long-term cost look like? And how can we best keep up with that with the revenue sources we have? The potential of creating a historic district as well on our historic resources, which is in the village overlay as well. And maybe even with the planning, zoning up code updates, maybe taking the overlay and making that a mandatory requirement. The personnel manual.
Seth, let me interrupt you 1 second. There already is a historic district here, like on the books, just so you know.
Well, and maybe what I need to be clear about is we have a historic district here, but you don't have any enforcement mechanisms by
Yeah,
which,
I agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, by which
It's
to
also
build
like
your-
a marketing piece too, right? It's sort of about
Yeah.
branding in a way.
Mhm.
Right. The staff continuity plan, this is again adapting to COVID and other things. It's sometimes less what happens if, let's say, the building were to burn down, and how do you return to normal as quick as possible. It's that interim period is what resources do we have to take town business and make it work in the interim while you're kind of getting town hall back up and those sort of things. Is it possible to get phone lines switched to somebody's, cell phones? It can be as low technology as that, so we can continue to work from home and get phone calls there.
Hey, Seth, I'm gonna stop you for just a second. Seth, let Jay back. He's trying to get in. He got bumped out. Can you let him back
Okay.
in?
Sorry. I've got you on the cascade, and you're starting becoming small tiles on the side.
That's okay. Go to your participants.
I'm back. Thank
There you go.
guys.
Okay.
Sorry.
So staff continuity plan is just, again, it's not exclusively work from home, but it's redundancies, backups at the wastewater treatment plant in case the main computer system goes down. What sort of backup system do we have on those sorts of things? So its scalability is quite big in that regard. Then these other two are more implementable. One, safe routes to school. This may come out of Parks and Rec next month. There's opportunity to use the Safe Routes to School, which is a grant program through the state, which they do 80% of the funding. We do 20%, and we might be able to do another street with having sidewalks alongside of it, as we've done a number of retrofits in town over the years. And then this kind of lingered out there. The Parks and Rec Board has tabled it. There's still some other interest in different areas, but trail and boardwalk to the Beaver Pond, maybe not around potentially at this point in time through some other homes that was proposed, but it is a nice nature feature in town. There's opportunity to allow it to be ADA accessible so that we have this nature areas I mentioned along the path getting there. You could put little signs, what you might see as you walk down through here in terms of wildlife and other things. So it becomes sort of just a tranquil place and offers a different level of amenity that we really don't have in our park system per se, unless you walk between the two developments of Tama. But, this is just mine. There may be a whole lot of other initiatives out there. I mean, Carrie mentioned, the new committees as possibilities as well.
Right. And I think that it's good to, thank you for this. I think it's good for us to start, looking at these things. But we could be here all night with all the various things that all of us right here on this Zoom call want to do. But I think what is probably more important to start getting into is how are we going to what's the process that we're going to follow to have all of our stakeholders involved. And I don't know, maybe Ed, do you want to
Sure. Yeah. I'll
start
take
leading
it
us
from
through
here.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thank you, Seth. So even just when we got on one or two topics, we could really start going down a particular path, and that's important. But one of the things that's I think is very important is how do we make sure that we're getting stakeholder feedback? And so let's
Right.
talk about that for a moment, because I know there's the traditional way where a person could sign up and they have a couple of minutes to share some feedback to the commissioners. But let's really look at, as we are, and I'm alluding to something that Jeff was talking about earlier, where Jeff and I, we had a discussion, just, hey, we really want to know, what do the residents of Poolesville, what's important to them, all right? But I think there are a few stakeholder groups that we really need to hear from. They're definitely the residents. They're the businesses that operate here in Poolesville. Then there's also all those people who are volunteering to work on the different committees, whether it's the park and streets and recreation, or whether it's the planning or the fair access or the sustainable Poolesville committee. All of them have a lot of different value. And so I think if we come up with some type of process, some type of format where people have the opportunity just to share their concerns, share their thoughts, and share their ideas. All right. And I think that then we are in a better position just to have that insight, have that information. So what I was telling Carrie is let's talk about how do we do that? How do we get that information? Um, because I know for some people, coming to a board meeting is a challenge and trying to get on at the time that we have it. So what might be some other ways that their voice can be heard? What do you guys think? And unmute if you're talking.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, we've talked about this before, Ed. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know for sure. Like, we've invited the public to come and give feedback before, like, in front of us, and like asked for like input, had like charrettes, things like that. And they traditionally haven't been all that well attended, but we can probably do a better job of advertising it. It's worth a try. If they don't come, they don't come. But it's worth a try.
All right.
I'll also say one thing that's missing from your list, Seth, that I think is important. I mean, I could give you a whole bunch of suggestions, as I'm sure everyone here could, but I guess now is not the time for that. But one thing that probably should be on there is streetscape, which is something we passed, a couple of years ago, and the Willard project's gonna be integrated into that, and it looks like that's moving forward here pretty quickly, and we're gonna need to find funding for that. But I think that's a really, really important thing for our town. I think that it addresses walkability, it addresses cyclability, it addresses like people driving fast through town, it addresses beautification. I think it's a big one.
Mhm. And I didn't deliberately leave it off here, but I think it's a good point of discussion. Is that's one of those things where I see we need to implement pieces at a time. There's probably
Yes,
one other
probably.
item on here that's probably 1 to 2 years out, honestly, on this list versus a 2021 type of things, and we would struggle to complete all these. But some of these do have pressing timeframes based on what's happening
Yes,
with other projects
agreed.
happening around us.
Yeah, like the INI thing. I understand that.
Correct, in the forest bank. But I think we'll have to figure out another time, and this is part of what we're discussing tonight, is we're gonna have to come to a next meeting and what other initiatives do you want to see? Because this is just a list I've created based on feedback from multiple different people or things I've heard or things I know we need to do. So if we want to build out some initiatives, that are the next 12 to 18 months, we need to do that. And then we're going to need to actually prioritize these because we're not going to be able to do all these unless there's some other capability to implement these.
Right. And that goes back to just to really getting that stakeholder input. Right. And I think that we say, okay, how do we do it? Who do we go to? Who do we target and make sure their voices are heard? And what's the time frame to do that? Because there might be blind spots that we don't see, and that you could have a resident who might see something and have a great idea, but just the connection wasn't there to give them the opportunity to share the idea, with the understanding not every idea that's shared is going to be the priority for the 2021 2022 year. But I do think being able just to hear what those constituents, whether it's a resident, a business, when I say business, I'm thinking our nonprofit organizations that are here in the community, as well as our for-profit businesses. I think it's important to hear those voices. And so those who are impacted by the decisions we make should be able to have the opportunity. So I'll go back and say, how has it been done in the past? And then what might be some ways, and even though COVID is here, we can't let COVID break the opportunity to hear those voices. And so we might have to be creative. We might have to think out of the box, but we do need to gather the information. And then we have to, so I'll go back and say, what might have been some ways in addition to that, getting on the meeting's agenda, what might be some other ways that people can share their thoughts?
I think one, sort of easy group to interface with is the committees that we already have. These are volunteers who, are in a unique situation of being intimately involved already with the goings-ons of the town. And so, getting their feedback, all of us are liaisons to those committees, getting their feedback, starting with them, their residents and their volunteers, just starting there, I think is probably, sort of a no-brainer.
Okay.
Give you some
What
ideas.
about
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Martin.
I was gonna say, we talked to. I'm just thinking out loud here. This might not be anything worth pursuing, but we talked about the master plan and Survey Monkey. One possibility would be to take that list of priorities that Seth put together. Maybe we add some things to it. Maybe we don't. But put a Survey Monkey out. Like, what do you think? A priority here is. I don't know what the questions that we asked to try to prompt the information, but that's just one possibility living in these COVID times where we wouldn't have to have people meet with us. Just a thought. I mean, it's almost like a virtual suggestion box, but but we're asking them pointed questions.
I'll do is, so let's throw out some ideas. Let's start with this house. So how can we get stakeholder input? So Martin, you're saying surveys, right? That's one. I'm taking some notes. What are some other ways that we might be able to get a great idea, Martin? What might be some other venues or vehicles that we could use to hear their voices?
I can share some stuff that happens with some of my other clients from around the state. They have a coffee with the mayor. Okay. I mean, so you think the idea, they set it up informal. It's either like a coffee house or, forget the weather. You can work around that, where they have like a dozen donuts and coffee and they say, I'm going to be here. And if you show up, that's great, but it's kind of a one-on-one. Then they soon realize that the novelty wears off. Nobody shows up. You're having coffee by yourself. So then they said, well, let's bring it to the neighborhoods, because you can't really, you almost got to go to their door, but some people don't want to be bothered. So they said they didn't do it. Like, they assigned a council person to like a neighborhood, so your neighborhoods. And they said, we're going to have a walk with. And it was kind of like walk with the mayor once a month. And it wasn't like a meeting where they sat around, because, people will come prepared to do that. So it's like, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Show me what you're showcasing in the neighborhood, what you're proud of. Show me what your problems are. Show me how I can do that. And it got to be too much where it was like all 5 people kind of doing it. So they said, well, we'll break this up. We could do this once a month, and a council person or 2 will take, a type of thing like that. So, those were kind of the successes that they had with it. One where people come to them, and one where you go to them and you advertise in advance. And it almost became like a little parade, a little thing. A lot of it centered around public safety. So they brought like the police officer if they were walking the neighborhood, the community policing aspect of it, to make it type of deal. And then the last one was full blown, like over the top, where they scheduled these types of, I'll call them open houses, where they just said on odd times, like maybe Friday evening, town hall will have an open house and somebody will be there if you want to stop by. And those weren't really ever well attended. There just wasn't a draw. People don't want to come by and talk business. They want to come to talk something else and then incorporate business in it. If it was like when we had one client, it was a fire station where it was a town hall. So they had come meet the fire department, and they had a fire truck there and the lights on and, all the fun stuff that the kids want to see. And the council people were around talking to the parents at the same time. So like a draw that wasn't particularly you all, because it's kind of boring, even though we love it, but for most people.
Yeah, I can see. But
so those are some ideas around the state.
No, those are good. Now take some of those ideas and how can you convert that to be in compliance with the COVID piece? What might we be able to do?
Well, I think, having or inviting folks to a Zoom meeting, we'd have to have some kind of organization around it, though.
Yeah, we can do that.
Obviously, but I think folks would be, for example, when we do the Chamber of Commerce, we get a reasonably good audience on the Chamber of Commerce on that first Thursday at 8 a.m. And yeah, it's kind of it's streamed on Facebook, so folks can't really interact with that. But if they attended on the Zoom, then of course they could, speak. They could see and speak. just like we are doing now.
So going,
It's going to be.
Go ahead, Martin.
I was going to say it's going to, the finding things that are COVID friendly, it either means like electronically, like Zoom type stuff, which is I like Jay's idea of donuts and stuff. Like it gives some incentive to come out or like walking around, or like other obvious things, you go outdoors, but it's like, now we're in a really unfriendly outdoor kind of season where people don't really want to be walking around and chatting outside. I mean, some would, but probably a lot won't. That'll change in the spring clearly, but yeah.
So what would your thoughts be? I'm listening to what everyone's saying. What are your thoughts on if initially, sooner rather than later, it's if we had some type of Zoom at a different time where it's really just a listen and learn. It's not a listen and respond with all the answers, but it's really just a time that's a listen and learn. We'd have to add more structure to it. And Jay, I don't know if you had more than 2 commissioners, one, is that okay? I want to make sure that as I'm still learning a few things, could you have the 5 commissioners tap in, if everyone's schedule it works out, could you have 3 or more commissioners just listening with an outside facilitator? We might have a member in the community who has strong facilitation skills, and they could just facilitate within, we would create some type of process, but then someone to facilitate, just an opportunity for people to come in and share thoughts, ideas, concerns.
Yes, you can do that. And to kind of put it in a fine light, you're going to notify the public this is happening anyway, right? Because you want them to come. So you met the notice requirement, and you'll do that. So the people that have to be controlled are you all, meaning that when you're together, you can't really look at each other and say, well, what do you think about that? That's a great idea. We'll take care of that. So
basically you got to zip it and listen.
And if you put like bullet points where you could like read it at the beginning saying this is a discussion, but we're not here to come up with decisions, because nobody wants to feel like, well, I didn't go to the meeting and it was decided or it was thought about.
Right.
So since you're notifying, all of you can be there, but you all have the power to make it or break it. And I can come up with like bullet point rules that we could almost come up with would be like our community listening rules. And so when people kind of come to you and say, hey, I want a street light here, you can say, hey, thank you for your idea. We can't discuss the merits of that, but we appreciate your idea. Tell us why you think this is an important spot. And you see what I'm saying? There was never a discussion. It was just a take it in.
Yeah. And that's
I think that's exactly what we want to do.
Yeah, that's the intent. So because we can't get together in person the way we would all love to get together in person, maybe the next best thing is coming up with some different Zoom options, just like a listen learn, a town hall listen learn sessions, and then at the same time, I think what Martin was saying, at least having the survey, right? And we could work together to craft a survey. But I think even, we could work on what would be the best survey. If you do Survey Monkey, you control how to design your survey. So I think we could work on that piece. But
it might be neat to kind of have these sort of smaller group charrettes, virtual charrettes, listening sessions by neighborhood. Different neighborhoods might have different challenges, different agendas, different.
I would even say neighborhoods and interests.
Yeah, different neighborhoods and interests, and we could identify. Who are leaders, in those different, interest groups, to, if we've had problems in the past with attendance, maybe we start there so that they're, bringing in folks in their neighborhood or in their, whatever their organizational group is.
So So, and since this is a discussion meeting right now, make sure this is our work meeting. Jay, you keep me straight. So we're not making decisions, right? We're having a discussion. Is that the case?
Right. You're having
Listening and
discussions.
taking notes. Yeah.
I mean,
As
right
long
now.
as you don't come up with policy,
No, I
so
mean,
you're
no,
just coming up
for-
with ideas right now.
For right now. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
So for right now, a discussion idea is that when it's appropriate to go to the next step to move our idea forward at, I guess, our next meeting, right?
Right.
Mhm.
You take the idea, Seth runs with figuring out the details, comes back to you at the next meeting saying, this is how we do Survey Monkey. This is how it's going to go down. Do you guys like the plan? Then you vote on it.
Okay. Now, is it inappropriate to propose something now, or just do I wait till
No.
the next meeting?
You can propose it all now because it was a public meeting. You
Okay.
just are kind of on your honor that you're not voting on anything tonight.
All right. So
I would, before you do that, Ed, and I don't want to interrupt you too much, but
no, go ahead, Jeff.
Seth gave us a list
Mhm.
of quite a number of important things that were still incomplete. And it's, I don't know, in my 2 cents, I kind of feel we should tackle some of these things that are on Seth's incomplete list before we start jumping into a whole new list of stuff to do. I mean,
Well,
I think
what I was
right here is
thinking-
going to keep several people busy for, some length of time.
Okay.
And honestly, I kind of feel like we need to clean up, not clean up, but we need to finish some things that were started before we should really take on new things. I certainly would be agreeable to, have these, which I think is a great idea, to have these sessions where we can listen and take notes and maybe build a list that's going to happen after we finish the stuff
let
that's
me-
already been started.
Let me give you an
ahead.
example. Seth, can you share your screen you had up earlier?
Yep, absolutely.
I'll show you an idea of how it might all work together. And so a listen and learn, right? It wouldn't necessarily, there might be some things that we're missing that probably that might need to go on the list. That's one piece. Another piece might be someone might say, you know what, I have some ideas around economic development. Somebody else might say, hey, I have some ideas around the creation of a historic district. And so I would propose that we would have listen and learns by neighborhood and by topic. All right. And so you could take some of these topics that are here and folks might have some ideas, because what I also know is that when you have an exhaustive list here, those who are really interested, those who are really passionate about maybe something that's on here, this might just like be their thing. I'll just pick one, like creation of a historic district. Well, they might be like that, like they might not have the time to come to that board meeting on a Monday night at 7, but they might have time to contribute in some way, because I think moving forward, there's so much talent right here in Poolsville that we might wind up having a few other work groups, of volunteers who say, hey, I like to help out on this particular piece. So I think what we do by just listening, we haven't made any decisions, but if we listen, we might grab a couple of more valuable ideas, valuable people who say, hey, I like to get involved in such and such. And then as we roll into that implementation of doing the work, right? Because I think right now we have about 6 committees, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 committees, and they're focused on certain things. But when you look at this list and that's why I go back to the other question too, what might be something that's a committee? What might be something that's the town staff? What might be something that's commissioners? And so things we need to fall in one of those 3 categories. And there might be a 4th that says, hey, this is a committee that hasn't been developed. And then you might say, well, some of these things all fit underneath this particular group. All right. And so I'm not looking for a list of a long list of new priorities, but I am very much so interested in people's thinking about what are their ideas? What are their thoughts? Jeff, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, and I'm very much interested in getting because like I say, you and I talked about this some time back, and so I'm very much interested in hearing what's on the minds of the residents. but I do feel we need to finish up some of the things that were started and maybe underway and haven't been quite completed before we start building a list. I'm afraid of building a list that's unachievable because, I always want to do things that are doable.
Martin?
Yeah.
Well, look at it this way. Maybe here's a different way to look at it. The things that are on Seth's list, I don't remember all of them, but they've been created based on past feedback and past
Seth is sharing his screen also. You can see if you look, Seth's list is on the screen.
I'm talking about the things. Is this the list, Seth? This is not the list of things that were incomplete, right?
Sure. I'll share that just so we can talk from this.
Well, it's okay. I'm just you don't even need to. I'm just saying that the things on Seth's other lists are things that have been, we've already gotten input from people, and they're ongoing. They're from several years ago. So we're working on those. We have to continue to work on those, and we can still work on those while we listen to other feedback. I think, in other words, we can walk and chew gum. I think that those things are going to get dealt with. They're in the queue, but I don't think it's necessarily the wrong idea to add new things to the queue while we're working on the past stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think that the what I'll wind up proposing is a structure that would allow us to get stakeholder input, so that once we have that input, then we're better equipped to make sure that what we do is in alignment with those, because those who are impacted by the decisions we make, I think it's very important that what we're going after is in alignment with what is important to folks, the community. So that's all. Not to belabor it. So what I'd like to propose, not for a decision right now, I would like to propose coming up with a structure that would allow us to have stakeholder input in terms of just hearing that voice, a town hall, a virtual town hall, listen and learn. And then we could work out what's the best way to go about it. Because now I'm going to be selfish for a minute. There might be some ideas that we totally missed that different committees might say, hey, wait a minute, that's a great idea. All right. And I know with the Fair Access Committee, there might be, because it's a hot thing, and there might be some ideas that no one on the committee came up with, and they might say, hey, have you guys thought about such and such? All right. And so it's, I don't know everything, but I do know it's, don't be afraid to see if there's water in the rocks, and there might be a spring that you tap into of wealth of information and insight, but no one ever just tapped it. All right.
Yeah. Seth, do you agree with what I said about how these things that you put on the screen, those can just be kind of in the background getting done? Do you agree?
Yeah, and
these aren't big things.
Well, yeah. Well, some of these got a little bit of teeth to them, but some of them are also under your initiatives because they kind of overlap because they haven't really been started enough. But I think at the end of the day, we're eventually going to have to come back to prioritization, because Jeff is right. I mean, just to be quite frank and honest about, there's enough in here for 2 years worth of work, and we may add to it. And then somebody talked about a couple people who are going to do this, and I'm not sure who those couple people are that are going to be around. I mean, there's a resource limitation, as well. So we need to figure out how we divvy that up. Now, whether that's, as you indicated, community members helping with some of these things, whether some of boards and committees help with some of these things, but at the end of the day, some of these are need to be done with accountability, right, and deadlines and timeframes, right, and so it's hard to hold volunteers' feet to the fire on those type of things.
Yeah.
Well, for the stuff I'm looking at here, I mean, some of these things, like the example, the benefit assessment fee, you're going to have to push us on that, and we need to have an answer on that very much sooner rather than later. I mean, probably we need to make some decisions on that in the next meeting or two, at the latest. So, but other things, I mean, you're working on a historic signage, that's already been voted on. The Forest Bank has been voted on. That's done.
Well, it's
bike racks.
Let me pause there a minute. How should I say this? is done in the sense that you all voted on it and that we and Jay have to do something with it. But it's sometimes important to remember some of the things that come before your dais are the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot underneath that iceberg, right?
Yeah, I understand that. You're right. Yeah,
And
okay.
I'm not trying
Fair
to
enough.
I'm not trying to be, whatever about it, but it's important to remember there's a lot of work behind these concepts
Sure.
in different agencies. But
So,
yeah.
so
Sure.
Seth, what I'm hearing is I hear two different things. That I hear on one to-do list, things that commissioners need to make sure that we get done. There's an accountability for us, and that might be our role in all of these things. And if our role is before something can move over to the next step, it's do we need to vote on something? Do we need to do something? So look at that to-do list for the commissioners. We got to make sure that our stuff is done so that you can go do what you need, so that you can lead what you have to lead. And that's a different kind of punch list, so to speak.
Yep.
Right. That's all, because it definitely, there's the tip of the iceberg, and then there's all that other stuff underneath the iceberg that has to get done. But I would hate to see the commissioners be the reason that certain things aren't done, or things aren't moving. Right. So I think from that perspective, it's when I look at the list, is there anything on here that we're holding up? And not, don't answer that now, because we're just having a discussion. Sure. It's just an example. But I think for tonight's purposes, we wanted to look at what were the things that we weren't able to do? What are some things that we did, successes that we had? And then really looking at how do we get more input, so that is important. And I like the word Jim said earlier. He talked about that transparency, and what he said about he believes in those committees that we have. He talked about the planning committee. I'm sure he also would extend that to all the different boards and committees that we have. And so I think that Carrie, you said earlier that one way is that we all are liaisons to committees, so we can get information and feedback directly from the committees we sit on. But then there's so many people in the town who aren't on the committees, and they might not have watched all the YouTubes. I'm still working my way through the last planning meeting, the marathon planning meeting on YouTube, right? So what I would propose is that we come up with this system of what I said earlier. Now, I know I'm being redundant, but I'm also trying to move us forward, because we could be here to 10 o'clock talking about the same thing. But I think on a very structural level, right, is just putting the tools in place so that we can grab the information. And no matter how many things we have on the list, I think it's important at least to listen, because there might be something that is so valuable that we miss, that something, and it might just be one or two things, that thing really needs to be on the list. And then there might be some other input that helps make the other things that are already on the list more doable, and maybe there's a way to make it even better than what we've thought. So that's
what do
all.
you think we can realistically decide on this evening in order to move forward with the process?
Are we just, Jay, this is where I'll get you to step in for the purpose of this kind of meeting. Can we make a decision now, or do we have to wait to official?
I guess it depends on the nature of it. If you're just talking about coming up with like an administrative structure, that's not a problem. If you're talking about coming up with policy that you should have input on. So if it's how you do things, that's no problem. If it's how the town's going to do things, that's a problem.
Okay. So I'm thinking from an administrative standpoint, just a simple, hey, can we look at the calendar, pick a few dates, do a virtual town hall? We would have to put our heads together and say, hey, maybe we could do it by topic of interest and take the things that are already listed, and by maybe by community, by neighborhood, and I'm just brainstorming right now, but something, that type of structure. Right. I'm happy to facilitate one of them.
It feels to me like the only thing we want to do right now is ask Jay to put together those bullet points so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot at one of these listen and learn sessions. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the commissioner shooting ourselves in the foot accidentally. So I would just suggest that we ask Jay to put together those kind of rules for the commissioners to behave properly on these listen and learns. But
I think part of that structure is how the administrative part of it is how do you want to admit, probably next meeting is, how are we going to effectively get this? So we've talked a lot of ideas about how to do it, but we've not settled on an approach to do it. And once we settle on approach, then we can start scheduling meetings, and then Jay can have that, list, which a lot of it's going to be, don't overcommit yourselves until what's required of that request from the resident. It's taking the information in. I think part of this is trying to turn some of this, I don't know about all of it, but some of it into a matrix of responsibilities that Ed has said, and come back and start looking at this with a little bit more granularity. Again, I'll say for the last time, this is mainly my list compiled from a year's worth of observations, listening from commission, what we know we need to do as priorities in terms of ensuring that everything's in sync in town as we approve developments. Somebody's gonna probably need forest bank. They're gonna need capacity. Those things are real pressing issues that can't be opted out of unless we say no on other mechanisms. But really, we've got a matrix. We've got what process we're going to do. Jay can then give you the bullet points of what not to do when you have those meetings. And then we actually formulate the meetings with the public. Whether it's survey plus public input through Zoom, which I imagine will happen, those need to be decided before we can set dates.
Go ahead, Martin.
Can I just ask if I'm understanding one thing you're saying correctly, Seth? And before we get too far down this road, it sounds to me like you're saying that's great that you guys want to have like all the citizen input, resident input stuff and all, but we already have a pretty full agenda now. Like it sounds like you're a little worried that we're gonna say, okay, you have like 15 things on there, here's another 15, and then you're gonna be like, oh wow, like this is like, this takes us down the road years and years or something like that.
Well, and I think there's a balance to be had here, because if we're going to start to the master plan in some form or fashion in 8 months, we're starting to mimic that process a little bit. And then the other thing that you'll have to consider with this prioritization is, to your direct answer, Martin, is yes, there's some of that concern at place. But what I don't want to be expressed in that statement is that the public opinion and input isn't valuable. I think there's value there too. So,
of course,
some of this could be, we know 3 things on here have to happen no matter what occurs, right? But then the other 8 or 10 things, do you want to put in the prioritization for a survey to the community and leave it there? You want listen and learns, I think, for continuous feedback, regardless of this process. But right now, because of this process, you definitely want input. And that gets me down to one point that I think you'll all have to determine is, when you go and solicit input, you're going to get that. You're going to add it to this. Let's say 15 we already have, and let's say we get another 15 is, when you get that input from the citizens, you're going to have to feel comfortable potentially saying, this is not a priority now, maybe in future years it is. And so you're going to have to prioritize an additional amount. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something you have to consider, that somebody's request is not going to become a priority.
One thing you could do with the Survey Monkey thing, and Ed, I'd like to hear Ed's feedback on this and everybody's feedback, frankly, is we could take our list of say it's 30 different things or 25 different things that we've come up with, and we can say, please 1 through 5, please rank these in priority. You think that they are to the town, so like streetscape, I think it's a 3, forest bank. Forest bank's not a good example. We have to get that done, but people could rank these things, and then we could compile all that, and that's probably very similar to what they did for the master plan. And then we'd have like a pie chart that said 80% of the residents thought this was the top priority. 65% thought this was the top priority, and so forth.
See, Martin, this is how I would envision it: is you have maybe there's a 2-week time frame at different times, right, where we might have these virtual listen and learns following the things that Jay sets up, right, so that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, but we're just listening. And now we take that information and we synthesize that information to develop a survey. So now we're getting information. It's like you run a focus group. Here's what's important to the people, and now you begin to do a survey, because everybody's not going to show up. right? You'll probably get a smaller number of participants, but those who showed up, right, you want to hear what they have to say. Now you begin to use that data, that input, to create a survey. Now within the survey, we're going to go out, use it as a tool to collect data that helps so that we're making data-driven decisions. Now, of course, there are those non-negotiables, right? The non-negotiables that have to get done, well, those get bumped on the list as top priorities. And we go into this whole thing with the understanding that there is the capacity issue. The capacity issue that we have a staff of 20, right? And we have the 5 or 6 committees, and they have a limited, everybody has a capacity cap. So we work within that capacity, and then the decisions that we have to make, what's missing that we can add? Do you need a new committee for something? Or do we help resource the existing committees, right, to expand their capacity? So they're moving parts. It's like gears, right? We got to move forward. And if we got to look at all the different gears, and the information, the data is really the lubricant to the gears to keep it moving. All right. And so we're not committing to adding an additional 15 things on there, because you can't, it would not be wise to try to move beyond your capacity if you don't raise the capacity. But it would be wise to make sure that at least that we start with the listening, and then we go into the prioritizing. But you take your non-negotiables, you put them at the top of the list. We know that's going to take a certain amount of time, right? Because I'd rather go through this type of this process on the front end than to hear people complain on the back end. Well, you guys came up with these priorities, and I know that was from there, but hey, I sure wish you would have listened to what we had to say. Right. And I think that we have the responsibility to then, once we have all the information, then to use our best judgment that is also supported by some of that data, and we provide ample opportunities where people can help have input, and then I think we're in a better position, because we're here not just representing ourselves, but we're representing all the community. So that's why, so I think that piece is important. And Seth, I'd be one of the first to stand up for the staff and for you to say, let's look at these ideas. Now, out of all these ideas, these are the ones, and I would love for us to be doing this in person, because we would just put together a chart and say, okay, here are 35 ideas. Now, we're going to circle the ones that are in the back, that have been in the queue for some time. All right, these are priorities, but I would expect it to say, why is it a priority? And what makes it a priority? And to say, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a priority, right? I don't want it to be a priority because it's on the list. I want it to be a priority because there's something to back it up, to say this is why it's a priority. And of course, the non-negotiables are the non-negotiables, because there's some legal ramifications of this has to get done. And so, not to complicate it, right? I think that we come up with Seth, we'll go through, check some of those boxes that you brought up, which is the structure, the who, right? And then once we have that structure, then we could come up with a time frame. But I believe, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're simply just doing an opportunity for stakeholder groups to share some thoughts and feedback, right, ideas and concerns, then we get that information. Now we have that information, and now we could use that to complete that survey with the understanding, and even the disclaimer, this information will be used as we continue to, we could wordsmith how it needs to be. But then I think that's a very transparent way from people I've talked to who say, hey, Ed, I got kids. We can't do this. I love to jump on for those 3 minutes, but I really can't get on that time. And I don't think we have other vehicles. There's email, but email is not as personable as a person sitting there hearing what you got to say and maybe asking a clarifying question.
This is Jeff. It's going on 9 o'clock. I feel like we're going in circles.
Yeah.
All right.
I would really ask Jay if you could put together the rules, the anti-shoot it yourself in the foot commissioner rules, and we can figure out dates and structure on the listen and learn thing at some other time.
Right.
Next
I'll
time.
do it.
What about
Circulate
so that we can, not be sitting here all night long? What about? I mean, I've been taking notes on all of the various ideas that we've had on the process. How are we going to do this process? What if I put that together? Maybe Ed, if you don't mind, in collaboration with yourself, and then we can send that out to everybody else and try to move forward a little quicker on that.
Okay. That works.
What do you
Okay.
see as the next meeting date time frame?
What's that, Seth?
When do you want to meet next? When do you want to meet next to keep this moving?
Wouldn't that be the next regular commissioner meeting?
You mean to have another work session?
Well, yeah, to start rounding out, you and Ed are going to put something together, but that still isn't, I think the crew still has to come back to agree on what are these input processes going to look like? Is it survey? Is it listen, learn? Is it combination? How are we going to engage the public, right? And then get on the same page to say, this is our path. This is our proposal that'll best engage the public. You all agree, and let's set meetings for that, or let's start the survey process.
Well, how about I throw out some dates as well?
Sure.
Great.
All right. So,
Sounds good.
so Jeff, I don't have to get my bulletproof foot vest, huh? Jay's gonna get me
We all will.
myself in the foot.
We have to
Put a
get
safety lock on my pistol.
those steel toe shoes. Yeah.
Hey, look, I gotta have to put
it's
a
not
special.
your feet that usually cause the problem. It's
Believe,
Good point, good
believe
point.
me, I can zip it when I have to. All right, so I think we're good then, right?
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you. Thank you for that.
And for everyone, I guess, who's watching, I hope they didn't get dizzy on the merry-go-round.
So I guess at this point, we can adjourn to our closed session unless there's anything else.
Is there a separate link?
Yeah, I'll send that to you now.
Okay.
Does someone
All
want to
right.
make a motion to adjourn to closed session?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I'm sending you
closed
the
session
we'll,
email.
for personnel.
Say it again, Jay.
This is for closed session for personnel is what you're adjourning for.
Right.
Correct.
And I would say take a 5-minute recess to do any kind of restroom things you need to get done.
Okay, and then Ed's going to send out another.
I'm getting ready to
Link.
send it to you now.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You all and have a good evening.
All right,
Thank you.
take care.